Afternoon, good afternoon, everybody. This roundtable conducted by the Committee on Appropriations and Adjudications will now come to order. Notice the roundtable hearing was disseminated to all local media outlets via electronic format on Thursday, July the 13th, with the second notice provided on Monday, July the 17th. Notice the hearing of this roundtable was also made known on the Guam Legislature's website. The committee thought that we would convene this roundtable because after the last hearing, there were several major issues that I thought that we could discuss together and come to an agreement so that when we report it out, it'll be something that we can all support and not make any further amendments that might require that the bill go back for a third hearing. That's currently under our standing rules. If there's a substantial change, it'll have to go back for a hearing. So I wanted to get a few things discussed with everyone and addressed. The first issue that was brought up, unfortunately the ones that brought it up aren't here. The first issue was the cost of the credit or the offset for implementation. And in our research, we've discovered also that the cost of the machines is anywhere from $250,000 to $300,000. It was our understanding that the cost of government compliance is already a tax deductible. It's provided for. And I just wanted to get on the record from them or from anyone that's in the business community whether or not this $300,000, if they had to do it because of tax compliance with a statute, would be tax deductible, or did they just want a tax credit so they could take it against the cigarette taxes or what? I don't understand that. Or maybe just correct me if I'm wrong, that it's a tax deduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My name is Ricardo Duenas. I'm with Western Sales Trading Company. We're one of the cigarette distributors that are operating here on the island. When we came before this body during the public hearing, we were in full support of the measure. We felt that that it provided an avenue for level playing field among all distributors and also address the issue of illicit cigarettes that were leaking into the island. And we were cognizant of the fact that it would take an investment on each distributor's part to acquire equipment that would be necessary to comply with the law. When we talk about tax credits, obviously, from the perspective of a private business, we are always welcome to having a tax credit. When we looked at it, we did recognize that the $250,000 to $300,000, there are tax credits available within the income tax system under existing law, under the Federal Internal Revenue Code and the Guam Territorial Income Tax Code. There are already credits that are available in the form of, first of all, depreciation, where we can take a deduction over a period of anywhere from 5 to 7 years on equipment that's purchased. There's bonus depreciation, where you could accelerate the amount of depreciation. And there's also what they call Section 179 tax credits, or a tax deduction, where you could deduct 100% of the cost of the equipment in the first year that you purchase it, up to a limit of $500,000. So obviously the $250,000 to $300,000 falls within those limitations. When we talk about tax credits against either the gross receipts tax or the Guam tobacco tax, which are local taxes, there are no provisions under the law for allowing any of those credits. And to allow those credits, I think, goes against the whole concept of what a gross receipts tax is. All the businesses that operate here, with the exception of banking and insurance industries, are not allowed any deductions or any credits for business expenses or investments against the gross receipts or tobacco taxes. And I think it's a dangerous precedent if we start speaking or we start allowing those tax credits to deteriorate our gross receipts tax base or tobacco tax base. It sets a dangerous precedent for other industries who might want to come in. We view it as a cost of doing business. We understand that it's built into our model that we have to do that. Then we will recapture those costs within 5 years, at least 5 years, under the income tax. As far as the tobacco tax, we don't feel that it's necessary from our perspective as an individual distributor. And as I said, it sets a dangerous precedent. There are many other instances under Guam law where certain regulatory costs are put upon on a private business, whether it be for safety, health, or other reasons. There's equipment. I mean, if you just look at the restaurant industry, there's a substantial investment that has to be made for fire suppression systems, for ventilation systems, for recovery of waste oil. Those are all things that every business has to build into their business model, and we don't feel that it's necessary for the government to deteriorate their gross receipts tax base. In addition, with the gross receipts taxes, those are under a number of circumstances already pledged to a number of bond issues, and those bond issues have covenants that require that there's no degradation of the gross receipts tax base. So that could get us into trouble if we start giving out tax credits.
I just wanted to make sure that I got that on the record, that there is provision for recovery under the IRS, and there is no need for any additional local assistance or benefit.
Well, that's our understanding, and that is our opinion as well. I think our opinion is as a business, we have built it into our model. Now, I can't speak for other distributors that might have opposing views on that, but I don't think that it's necessary for the government to give out additional tax credits on these investments.
Okay, great. Appreciate that. The second issue that we had was the bill as currently written has a 90-day implementation. At the hearing, the OPA testified that the timeline seemed unlikely, and that was a word, that's why it's in quotes. We don't have DRT here, but as a business, would you believe that any other timeline would be better, maybe 6 months or a year? I'm open for any suggestions from someone on the date that we implement this. There is a revenue tax. Okay.
Mr. Speaker, if I could speak to that as well. We did look at the issue of the implementation with the 90 days. Subsequent to that, we have spoken with some of the manufacturers back in the U.S. mainland who have a quite extensive experience in providing these systems and equipment and working with a number of government tax agencies back in the U.S. And they expressed also that 90 days might be a little bit aggressive, that they were saying that to get the stamps designed, produced, and implemented and integrated with Department of Revenue and Taxation could take up to a year to fully implement. Our attitude towards that was we want to try to get that in as soon as possible. Our concern is that if we put it so far out there, the implementation, that will fall into a situation that we've seen many times with the government, where at the 11th hour, no work has been done to achieve the goal, and then all of a sudden it's, well, we need more time, we need another year, we need additional time. Our recommendation or our suggestion would be that we set time limits to meet certain milestones, so that within 90 days we do come back and we report to this body as a group, and especially working with Revenue and Taxation, they would be the lead agency in implementing this, that they come back within 90 days and report. We've been in contact with a number of manufacturers. These are the things that we've discussed, and come back with an implementation guideline within the next 90 days. So that way there's feedback from them, but also there's a timeline, there's a schedule, something that we can be measured by. Obviously, if we don't measure anything, nothing gets done. So that would be our recommendation. How to approach it is to set a time limit within the next 90 days. We want to report back how much it's going to cost, how are you going to do it, and we want these things implemented, staggered over the next 12 months or so.
A reasonable or a workable implementation schedule?
Thank you, Speaker. At this particular time, even going with what, I'm sorry, I didn't get you, Mr. Dueñas is saying, again, in the business license side, I don't think that's going to be very feasible for us to do that. One being that a lot of us do have other mandates that we're still handling, and then to add that on to that would be a different load for us again to undertake. So as far as that, I'm not sure that would be feasible for us at this particular time, but whatever you guys put on the table, then we would have to go back and discuss that again with our various branches.
Do you have a recommendation? Do any of you have recommendations or the milestones that we should have?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree with Mr. Dueñas' statement that we do definitely need to set some kind of a timeline for action, whether it's a milestone-based timeline or an implementation timeline that is, shorter than a year. While it may be aggressive, I think that aggressive would actually allow us to measure progress. So I very much agree that we do need to have some kind of timeline in place. As far as the mandates of rev and tax, basically the way I'm reading this situation is we just basically need to promulgate the rules and regulations for how we're going to be implementing a tax stamp program. And with this being in 49 other states, I don't see how it would be exceptionally difficult for us to find rules and regs that we can model in order for us to be able to do this, especially because the law is not specifically spelling out how exactly to go about implementing the particular program. I think that a timeline for the establishment of rules and regulations could be established, and perhaps we can get some feedback from Director Gillen, who has some experience in trying to put together rules and regulations with respect to an entirely new mandate. Perhaps a timeline could be advised. There you go, I got it.
Oh, thank you for bringing that up. Sometimes there are mandates that I think are well intended, but then have consequences we didn't anticipate, like the laboratory for medicinal marijuana. I don't know. I think you're right. If there are 49 other states already doing tax stamps, we should be able to find one that fits, and even the machinery and everything else to make sure it's tamper-proof. My only concern here is that you do it as soon as possible, and that the revenues that can be generated from that go into the Healthy Futures Fund. That's more opportunity for us to educate our people about a product, when taken as directed, will kill you. So, and we know that 15 cents per 100 cigarettes is only going to be passed on to the consumer anyway. So, when we talk about taxes, we're not talking about the wholesaler or the retailer, incurring the expense. It's always the people that pay. But I'd rather have them pay the 15 cents than pay for more cancer and more hardship. I would, though, suggest, and I don't know how you would go about doing it because I just am not familiar with tobacco products at all. What about cigars? What about smokeless tobacco? All of the chewing tobacco, all of those, and how we can do the equivalence somehow to make sure that.
And I appreciate that comment. We'll come back to the time, but I think we also have to think about your comment about the cigars, the smokeless, the cans.
Could be for another
the
time.
OPA in her comments did note that it's not clear in here if those products are included. And so I need a clear statement, either one way or another, whether or not it was in here or not in here. And if it is in here, then we know that it is. So that was it intended to be in here or not? So that when we report the bill out for a second hearing, that if it was intended to be in here, that we have a hearing on it so that we can take it to the floor but you're the second director to make mention of that, and I think we've got to get it clear because that's a big part of it.
Mr. Speaker, my understanding from the reading of the bill is that it's specific to cigarettes. It does make mention during the course of the bill. It talks about cigarettes and tobacco-related products, and cigarettes is specifically defined and narrowly defined. And when it comes to the discussion of the application of the stamps, it's specific to cigarettes. Now, not to say that in the future we could look, this body could look at applying that to cigars and smokeless tobacco. My attitude towards that is, well, let's walk first before we start running. Let's get this system. I mean, obviously, because this is the bigger part of all tobacco products on the island. It is probably 98% of the market when you talk about all tobacco products. So by doing this law, you've already addressed the major portion of the concern. If we're able to get this thing up and running, get it efficient, then I'm sure that public health would be happy to step forward and say, okay, now we should start doing this to these other tobacco products. I think it's important that we start out with something that's significant. This bill is significant, and there is a large amount of history back in the U.S. of how this is being implemented. So it would be an easier implementation to focus on this first. Now, I'm sensitive to the fact that there are a lot of mandates that are placed on our various government agencies, especially with public health and revenue and taxation. But let's keep in mind also that when we were looking at this bill, there was an estimate of a $12 million shortfall in collections annually on cigarette taxes. That's $12 million. That's a major figure. That's a large figure. That's a major reason to do this so quickly. And I am cognizant of the reality that maybe we can't get it fully implemented within 90 days, but we should be able to come back within 90 days and have a solid plan within the next 90 days. My understanding, there are basically two major operators back in the U.S. that produce these systems. And I'm sure that if revenue and taxation would sit down with any one of them, they would be able to provide a lot of information and a lot of suggestions on how it's properly implemented based on their experiences with any one of the 48 states that they operate in. So the implementation, if we wait a full year to come back with an idea, that's just unreasonable. I think it's reasonable to come back within 90 days and have a report from the stakeholders and from the players saying, well, we have met with these people. This is what has been explained to us. this is what they're recommending. And you know, since we're talking about the equipment being purchased by the distributors, really you're only looking at you know, seeking an RFP for, you know, advice, you know, for revenue and taxation. You're not looking for the government purchasing machines. So, you know, it would be easy for them to come in and make suggestions on how it should be implemented. What are the things you should be looking at? What are the pitfalls that we've seen with other jurisdictions when they've tried to implement these things? And not have to reinvent the wheel. You know, rely on their expertise and their experience.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to echo what Mr. Duenas was mentioning. I think that if we target first specifically the cigarettes, it will be easier for us to find model rules and regulations, particularly because some of the other products out there have a fairly recent history. They may not necessarily have the stamp procedures and even the stamp equipment in place. I think that we should first try and take out the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and then we'll go after all the other smaller fish after we've gotten the big hurdle cleared. But I do want to make it very clear that I would fully support a measure to track also the other products as well. But right now, talking about the timeline for implementation, the need to procure equipment, those other products would require a different type of equipment and perhaps even a different implementation timeline. So on the subject of the timeline, I wanted to make a recommendation to the group. Perhaps we can make change the mandate to require that the government of Guam shall develop within 90 days an implementation timeline that shall not exceed a full implementation deadline of August 1st, 2018, which would be 1 year roughly from today. So they have 90 days to basically research the entire issue, come up with a timeline to implement, and that timeline must be effective by August 1st.
Excuse me, Mr. Speaker, if I can beg your indulgence, in respect to the initial statement you made in regards to addressing the bill and hopefully addressing specific loopholes that we don't have to come back and tweak after the bill has been entertained on the floor, I wanted to suggest that the committee consider the inclusion of little cigars, cigarette-size cigars, as well as the RYOT, which is considered roll-your-own tobacco, when we're talking about tobacco products, to specifically identify these in the bill. I do know I did a little bit of research, and several states did include these products, or did not include these products specifically, and they've been faced with the difficulty in prosecution due to this loophole. So requiring tax stamps on roll-your-own tobaccos and little cigars would close that specific loophole if it's identified in the bill. I know we talked about other tobacco products, but I'm specifically talking about these two that are found locally on island, and we do know that there's quite a bit of people in our community that roll their own cigarettes due to the cost of purchasing cigarettes. It's merely a suggestion.
Okay, no, we appreciate that. That's the reason why I wanted to call this. I mean, these were just the issues that were raised, and with the recommendation from Mr. Duenas that we can address the OPA's concern. We wanted some specific statement in here. We know that we've left out certain things, but we are going to address it, or something to that effect. And I just wanted that on the record, so when we have the committee report and it goes to the floor, it was discussed in here that within 90 days we come back with them having provided a implementation plan, that the rules and regs be finished within 150, that and the distributors come back and say at the 90th day that we place the order and it's going to be, it'll be arriving in 2 months and whatever, so that we don't get to the 12th month and we haven't ordered, we haven't written the rules, we haven't done this, we haven't done that, and we find ourselves there. I just wanted to somehow get it on the record that these are the suggestions, but there's also now this suggestion that we expand the definition on mini cigars and roll your own. And I would like to get input from some of you as to whether or not we can or should, or are you going to hold the course that cigarettes, and then we'll deal with everything later. And
I would recommend that, Speaker, and I do definitely appreciate Ms. Castro's position. I would very much support separate legislation for stamping the additional products. If we look at the packet, then we'll see that some of the machines are very specific. And these machines are they're mechanical devices that are built to handle cigarettes, which are almost standardized in terms of their sizing. And so it would allow for the stamping process to be very industrious. And so if we were to add products that were unique in terms of sizing, it would require a different type of stamping mechanism, and that would create more of a cumbersome process. And that would definitely push back the implementation timeline. And so what I'm recommending is that we go with what we know there are already existing systems for. And then while the government is working out the implementation of this initial mandate, we work on a separate mandate for the other products, because those would definitely require separate systems anyway. And they would also probably require separate timelines. So in the interest of moving as expeditiously as possible on each of the different unique products, I think that this is a standalone bill would suffice, and then we can work on the additional legislation moving forward.
90% of the pie is better than 0, so I think, we've got this. If we're more specific about making sure that we're talking about cigarettes in their packages, and that the intent is to deal with the other products at another time, either an amendment or a separate law. We've got this in front of us. Let's get it, at least that.
Yeah, and the OPA's comments were only, it's not clear, make it clear, either one way or the other. And I just wanted it on the record that in a discussion, we've all decided we'll take the 90% and we'll deal with the other 10% at a later date, with everybody's understanding and commitment that we want to address all the rest of them. I mean, we did the same thing with the cigarette tax. We started with the regular cigarettes and realized everybody was going over to the little cans, and we got the little cans, and we dealt with that. So I just wanted to it clear, because the next question, go ahead, because then my next question.
All right, the other thing about the 90-day time, I think really hold feet to the fire by being very specific about what you're going to see on the 90th day after it becomes law. And I think it's right, it has to be measurable. What are you going to, what are you going to do? What do the regulations look like? What equipment are you preparing to put out for purchase? And that's going to be all in place, and then the wholesalers and retailers do whatever they need to do, and no later than August 21st or whatever the date.
For the full implementation is saying.
Full implementation. Or sooner if it's possible.
Okay. Well, the one other thing is that I wanted to get clear and discuss in this group is the enforcement. We have three types of enforcement, I think. There's one specifically just DRT. There's a second one with you and the AG's office. And then there's a third recommendation of private citizens filing a suit to do something. I need comments and clarification on how everybody figures this is going to be done. Go ahead.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear also. How do you intend to enforce this, even with these provisions? Because they're very similar to existing provisions that we know are not being that closely enforced. And the one with the AG is quite unusual.
As far as our department goes, I mean, not for any other reason, but a lot of the staff that we do have now are just fairly new and are slowly getting in line with their mandates and stuff that they, whatever branch that they're in. So in terms of how we're going to go about accomplishing that, I mean, that's something that we're going to have to bring up to each of the respective branch and see how they're going to tackle that. Of course, it's in our section, it's whatever is in front of us, that's what we have to work with. And again, a lot of us, me being one of the most senior there, I'm just about ready to retire soon, and so we have a new supervisor that's there with a totally new staff, and so that's something that they're going to have to work at and follow what's here, because I'm trying to get bits and pieces of this also and trying to understand it. So, you know, as far as how we're going to enforce it, of course, you know, that would have to come with whatever is brought here to the table. So,
can I ask what you mean? You said there's a new supervisor who will be in charge of this?
She's only there. She's only been there for not even a year yet, and of course she does know certain stuff there because she's been with the branch for about 6-7 years or maybe longer. But you know, she just took the helm as supervisor July of last year, and so she's now just getting her feet wet in all the mandates that she has at that particular branch. Of course, in the compliance side also, you know, the former senator was the acting supervisor at that time. Now we have a chief, they call him the chief because he's the most senior. And again, a lot of his staff are also fairly new. So we're getting new staffs that are in there, but at the same token, they're also learning the stuff that we've been doing on a day-to-day basis. Now with this new mandate, a lot of them aren't even familiar with what they need to do with that. So again, it's you know, if I was to stay a little longer, then maybe I can diagnose it a little bit more. But at this particular time, you know, the supervisor would be the one to more or less decide how that's going to go with the advisement of the director. You know?
Yeah, I think that we don't want to let this go the same way the Alcoholic Beverage Control Commission goes, and not have enough staff.
You need to speak a little louder.
Not have enough staff to, well, your acoustics, you need to fix that. Not have enough staff to really do the enforcement. But, you know, really, what is it going to take to, you know, go to one of these shelves and pull out the packages and see if there's a stamp there? You know, so you give them enough people to be able to do that on whatever schedule they want to establish, because you don't want to have a regular schedule. Just give them what they need to get it done. But I think it's a fairly simple thing to do, yeah? You got a stamp? Yes. You don't? You got a compliance? And I don't know. I mean, but it seems to be. I mean, but I also have experience with unfunded mandates, so I know that, you know, you cannot do it just wishing it's going to happen.
If I could add to the comments as well, you know, regarding implementation and enforcement, currently under the system that we have, the major distributors operate what's called a bonded warehouse, where when the cigarettes come in from off island, they're deposited into a controlled warehouse on our premises that's monitored by revenue and taxation, basically under lock and key by revenue and taxation. And whenever we want to distribute cigarettes into the market, we have to make a drawdown from that bonded market. Revenue taxation has to come in, open up the gate, document what cigarettes have been taken out of the bonded warehouse, and then we can go sell them, and we report that every month as far as what was withdrawn from the bonded market. So operating 2 or 3 bonded warehouses on island, you know, among the 4 distributors, you're talking about more manpower in monitoring those bonded warehouses. We probably draw from the bond at least once a week. So revenue and taxation has to come up to our warehouse at least once a week to for us to issue the cigarettes out. By not having those bonded warehouses, or by lessening the need for those bonded warehouses, because we're going to a stamp system, you reduce manpower that could be used for other purposes within revenue and taxation. Now, obviously, I don't work for revenue and taxation. I'm not sure if that's a correct assumption. But then also, when we're talking about the stamping of the cigarettes, just by having those stamps, they're designed so that it's easy to identify if the taxes have been paid. Part of the problem out in the market right now is you can walk into any retail establishment and look at a pack of cigarettes, and you have no idea whether those taxes were paid or not. We have no idea whether those were actually brought in by the authorized distributor or whether they were brought in black market. In past years, as a distributor, we've made inquiries with revenue taxation saying, you know, these guys are bringing cigarettes, and it's not our cigarettes. It has Philippine labeling on it and everything else. And it was very difficult for them to police it, to enforce it, because they were understaffed, and they had other more important things that they needed to do rather than go check on one store. The bill, my understanding is yes, revenue and taxation is the primary agency for enforcement, along with the Attorney General's office, and it does allow for public enforcement, meaning that any individual can, when he goes into a store and he sees it's not stamped, these haven't been tax paid, I can call the AG's office. I can call revenue and taxation. I can register a complaint, and I know that there's a violation because it's clearly evident. There's no stamp on it. You know, and you know, any public individual or now that we're in, we have no idea. You know, even when we go in with our products, you know we sold them. You know, we sold them cigarettes, but did they have some coming in from off island? We can check the packaging, and we could probably, but to the untrained eye, it's impossible. For agents of revenue and taxation, the AG's office, or any other regulatory body, they're not going to know. When we've had situations where we've had revenue and taxation say, what are your products, so we know what your products are. So when we go out there, we're doing a canvassing, and we're looking for enforcement, we know what you guys sell, and if there's brands out there that you or any other distributor doesn't sell, then obviously someone's bringing it in illegally. So, you know, just the whole program, you know, it's not, in addition to the enforcement of the tax collection, it's also going to help with the illicit cigarettes. And it's going to make it's going to make it so much easier for the enforcement because it's clearly evident. With a stamp means the tax has been paid. Without a stamp, the tax hasn't been paid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, and again, to echo Mr. Duenas, the benefit of this system is it's a highly visible system. And so just for the benefit of the listening audience, if they're unfamiliar, if you walk into a retail outlet and you look at their cigarette wall, you just see all the different brands. But what you'll see after these stamps are implemented is you'll see a little colored stamp on every single one of them. And so if you go in and you see any product that's offered for sale that doesn't have that stamp, you'll immediately be able to know that that tax was not paid on that cigarette. And you can help in the enforcement of that by making the necessary contacts to the enforcement agencies. And just to kind of give an example of how effective this system would be is to just liken it to our vehicle registration process, where when you register your car, you put your little colored sticker on your license plate, and just by observation, even our police officers can very quickly tell whether a car is registered or not. And so the same kind of system will now be in place for our cigarettes and the taxes that are supposed to be paid on those. And so by opening it up to allow for as many people as possible to be a part of ensuring that this process is being enforced, I think would be a very good thing. And again, as Mr. Duenas pointed out, on top of simply the tax component of it, the stamp will also allow us to be able to have a method of tracking back the retailer. So if a mom or a mother or father come home and they find a pack of cigarettes that their underage child got their hand, and there's a stamp on it, they can use that to help trace back where that cigarette pack came from and who got those cigarettes illegally into the hands of that minor. So it's not only going to provide a great tax basis, but it's also going to provide a good public health basis, and empowering our community to be able to participate in the enforcement of it will not only be empowering people to make sure that taxes are being paid, but it'll empower mothers and fathers to make sure that their children are not being sold illegal product, and to go after those who are selling those illegal products.
Senator, can I just expound a little bit further on that? From the public health issue is that black market cigarettes are, I'm looking at the health consequences of it. It's bad enough the U.S.-made cigarette has about 7,000 different chemicals in it, but black market cigarette, there was a study done about 5 years ago on black market cigarettes and the contents of it, and they were even more deadlier than the U.S.-made cigarette. And so on top of the taxes, we're also looking at the health factor of it all.
Mr. Chair, I'm curious about revenue tax under the existing system. What have been the impediments to enforcement? Because if they've been on lockdown in the bonded warehouses and you are able to track how much are going out, what happens after that then?
Oh, okay. Just for clarity, though, also I wanted to just mention that I'm here to represent the business license branch. There's supposed to be a compliance officer that's supposed to come down, and also somebody from GRT, because they're the one that bonds the tobaccos. In response to your question, Madam Senator, I believe it was last week that we went out and we did a tobacco enforcement, and we went out with the compliance officer and one with behavior science, I believe it was. I don't know, the behavior health, that new department that was one time mental health. And we did a island-wide sweep of all the retail outlets that are selling tobacco to minors. And so that's one of the avenues that we do to enforce the tobacco sale. And now as far as the stats, that's a separate thing with behavior health. But there is a yearly inspection that is done, but I feel that that's still not enough to tell the seriousness of what's happening here in terms of sale of tobacco and whether or not it's highly enforced. One point in taking that we have several people that would come in and they would still say, hey, I don't think that's right. I feel we were entrapped and this and that, and then do we waive that? No. I mean, so there's so many different ways of how we would like to enforce it, but we only can go so much based on what is given to us in terms of enforcing that particular activity that we're doing. So we are, but the other thing that we truly do need is also, like everything else, manpower. Manpower is one of the things that we lack. We're slowly getting some new people in that are still within the department, but they still lack the training and maybe some of the know-how because they're just getting on-hand training. But some of them had their first taste of it just this week. So, as far as the enforcement, we are out there. But as to whether or not we're out there as much as we would like to be, I think we can do more, but it's based on whether or not we're able to, so.
Mr. Duenas, may I ask you, so you were saying in your earlier testimony in the other hearing about the lost revenue to the government without the stamps. Is that then from the black market cigarettes primarily? Because revenue tax should be able to track the ones from the bonded warehouses, right?
Yeah, obviously, yes. I mean, they should be able to do that. Yes, there's a number of leaks in the system. We're talking about black market cigarettes that come in a container of mixed goods from the Philippines or from Korea. We're talking about cigarettes that leak out of the military market. The military, they're not subject to any Guam taxation. So obviously any cigarettes that they sell there, there's no Guam taxes have been paid on those cigarettes. So any cigarettes coming out from that market as well. We see that as a big problem with cigarettes and alcohol, where people are not just buying for their personal consumption out of the military bases, but they're buying for commercial purposes, where a number of bars or restaurants or, stores could go in there and they could buy 10 cartons of cigarettes and bring it out to the market and sell it in their stores. They could go out there and buy 10 cases of beer and sell it in their stores, sell it in their bars and restaurants. So the military has always been one of the major drains to the taxes for Guam. And obviously also when we talk about tobacco taxes, when we talk about GRT, and also as well income taxes, we're on a voluntary reporting basis. And whenever we're on a voluntary reporting basis, there's always an element out there that will try to sidestep their taxation responsibilities. So it's a combination of those 3 or 4 items that really have drained what GovGuam should actually be getting as far as tax collections.
Then just on the that voluntary reporting?
That's one of the issues.
Okay.
That's one of the issues.
But how does the bonded warehouse not solve that?
Not all of the, first of all, not all of the warehouses are bonded. I believe, I think 2 or 3 of them are, of the 4. I don't know. I'm not sure, to tell you the truth, because when we know what we pull out, we report, and we go in there and we pay our taxes. So yeah, your guess is as good as mine at that point.
Does any of you have a recommendation if the bill just says that any funds collected under this act there's going to be $200,000 put into a fund and then the rest goes to rev and tax generally, period. Do you have any recommendation to further?
I think the way the bill is written, there's like a $200,000 to $250,000 that's allocated directly for enforcement activities. And the rest, this bill doesn't change where those monies go. Under current law, all monies from tobacco tax collections goes into the Healthy Futures Fund, and none of that will be changed except with the exception of that $250,000 that's being allocated for enforcement purposes.
I think it's talking now about penalties, right? That's what the 200,000 now coming from penalties, not from the taxes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, collected. It's from penalties for not complying with this or things like that, I think. So maybe it's anticipated that there will be a lot more money made from penalties. I'm not sure. But if it was going to go to rev and tax, I guess I was just wondering if there's a mechanism that you would like to see where that money goes, particularly at rev and tax.
Yeah, if it goes to revenue tax, that would be great. Only because then we can have more manpower to go out there and do the stuff that we really need to do. And when you're talking about the penalties, though, Madam Senator, yeah, they do have that, and we've been imposing those penalties to those who violate, like the ones that we did just last week. There's going to be another one that's going to be coming out, and I don't know what the date is, and And like I said, we do that every year, and for the time that I've been there, we've done that every year. But again, that's just a small portion of the enforcement side. I still think that if the law is defined to really add more stringent guidelines to how it's to be enforced, then I think it'd be much better to the advantage of us making sure that we stick to that penalty, because here in Guam, there's always that, oh, I know this person, and let's talk to that person, and so forth. And being that this program that we did recently is actually part federal, it's very hard for us to waive that, but we're still getting flack for that. But like I said, if there's more clarified definition of how that is to be placed, then I'm pretty sure it makes it a lot easier for us to enforce, and the manpower for us to go out there and enforce that.
Okay. Well, then let me just sum up. on the issues at least that I had, there is no reason for us to change anything about the credits for the 250 to 300. The way that you worded within 90 days, come back with full implementation by August the 1st, and we'll just be a little more detailed about what we want on the 90th day. If any of you have recommendations, please just send it in on what you think what should be provided to the committee at that point in the 90 days. It was intentional that the little cigarettes and everything else was left out, and we're going to do the 90%, and we either need to make it, we'll discuss in the committee, in the office about whether or not we have to make it more clear so that OPA understands that, since that was her concern. And nobody has any problems with the way that the enforcement provisions are stated. Okay? So if that's, does anybody else want to add anything to say?
I think if the expectation is that that any fines or fees are going to fund the enforcement, then I think that's problematic. So if you set aside some of the Healthy Futures Fund to a certain amount, that would staff up this enforcement activity and even pay for whatever equipment, at least a one-time equipment payment, and then the staffing every year that the money's collected, that portion pay for that staffing. I don't think we would have a problem with that at all.
I think just looking at it from a timeline perspective, we can probably fund that in the next fiscal year budget, because since full implementation will be August 1st, 2018, and then we're also going to be able to anticipate greater revenues from the implementation, then we can definitely work on that on the budget side. I don't think it needs to be written into this particular bill, but that's definitely a good suggestion.
I think his concern was a concern that I had when I was at the court. I'd always had, I had constitutional issues with the court keeping the judicial building fund. I just gave me the heebie-jeebies. But they keep saying, oh no, that's constitutional. And I keep saying, there's a gross conflict that I just can't get over. But I'm no longer there. But I didn't like it, but others like it, and so I'm outvoted on that one. But thank you for bringing it up about having them keep the money. But if it's being done elsewhere, but we'll look at it to make sure that you are sufficiently staffed. Okay. And
Mr. Speaker, if I could make one more observation. I'm sorry. Regarding the 90-day time period to come back and report to this body as far as the progress that Revenue and Taxation has accomplished, I just want to stress that it's critical that that be done quickly. The reason being, we've already had conversations with a number of the manufacturers of these machines, and some of the questions that they've come back to us is, well, what kind of machine do you want? What kind of stamps are you going to be using? What kind of features are going to be included in this stamp? So those are questions that we cannot answer because it's really up to Revenue and Taxation as to the design of the stamps. What features they want to have on that stamp. There's any number of features that can be built in. It's akin to ordering a Cadillac, where you can get as many features as you want. You can get the base model, or you can get ones with all the bells and whistles. So from our perspective, at the end of the 90 days, if they've discussed these things with one or both of the different companies back in the States that supply these systems, that they come back with this very, very specific conclusion as far as what they're going to include in the stamps, how they're going to be designed, are they going to be adhesive, are they going to be heat applied, those kind of things. And I think it would give them the opportunity also to speak with them and say, to ask them what options or what opportunities are there for cigars and smokeless. So at the end of the 90 days, we have a concrete idea of what the system is going to entail and what we need to start in the on our side process as far as what kind of machinery do we need to be ordering. It also could address, as I said, the questions of how do you apply it to cigars and smokeless tobacco. Although it's not written into the law, why not be asking that question now for the future, so that if there is going to be additional legislation, those questions have been asked and answered already as far as what's involved. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm just rewinding it back to the perspective of the fact that this is being done in 49 other states. And so I think to advise Rev and Tax, I would suggest that they try and seek out jurisdictions that have similar circumstances as ours, and have a high impact from military bases, leakage, and everything else like that. And then from there, try and figure out what kind of rules and regulations those jurisdictions implemented, and then try and mirror it, because whatever worked over there will probably work over here if there's a lot of similarities. And then from there, of course, after the 90 days, you should be able to develop that timeline based on what those other jurisdictions have established, and then communicate back to the private sector folks so that they can know that, okay, we're going to be mirroring, the California model or what have you. But I think looking at what's out there already and comparing it to what our needs are and what we're capable of, I think will be the best place for Rev and Tax to start. Yeah. But I really don't think a 90-day timeline for coming up with a timeline is going to be too much to ask, given that there's just so much groundwork that's already been done on the subject matter.
But a timeline that has 1 year from the date of passage as the drop-dead date that it goes into effect.
Yeah, I'm certain that bringing that information up to the director, I'm pretty sure he'll be more appreciative of giving it that much time. So I think it can be workable. Mm-hmm.
Bill been substituted? No, right? No. Okay. All right. We're talking about 90 days to do the rules and regulations? Is that what the 90 days that you're referring to? Or there's 90 days that the OPA is referring to after passage for distributors to affix the tax stamp? It sounds like you're talking about a 90
well,
days.
Yes, but the thing is that's impossible.
Right.
We all agree. And so we're trying to find something, but not to where it's infinity. And the sponsor has said, well, if we can have 1 year from the date that the bill is signed as the drop-dead date that it goes into effect. But before that time, Rev and Tax comes back with, this is the design of the seal, this is the kind that we want, and these will be the machines that we think you probably ought to get. And at the same time, you'll tell us within 2 months after that you will have your rules and regulations and another set of enforcement rules. But everything has to be in place 12 months after the date that this thing passes. With everybody understanding that 12 months from the date of signature, there's going to be a whole new regimen. But in the meantime, all these things have to be done. But you guys have to lead us, and they will know that after you say, we want this kind of machine that we know, that they know, go order that from whoever. Okay? Do you have any other questions? With that, I want to thank everybody for coming this afternoon. Enjoy your 4-day weekends, and we will see each other soon.